Hey everybody, this is Dan.
And this is Ron,
This is a nominee.
a nominee questionable movies, season
And
2, episode 1.
yeah, first episode of our second season.
Yeah. How does it go? S02E01. Did I do that right?
Yep, if there's people out there bit torrenting this podcast, that's probably what it says. If you have bit torrented this podcast, please contact us. We want to have you on.
Yeah.
You're probably more invested in this than anyone besides Ron and I, possibly more than Ron and I,
Yeah.
because I definitely have not posted any of this to BitTorrent. But
And if you're
uh,
bit torrenting this, you're doing something wrong.
yeah, I mean, if you just like you're really worried we're gonna take it away from you or something, like I appreciate that, but I feel like there's not going to be a lot of compatibility issues with this archive in the future. Recorded audio is a problem we've kind of solved as a society, give or take.
Yeah, yeah.
So for the first episode of season 2, we watched Shadows, the first film by John Cassavetes, and what's generally considered. There's some other candidates that I think probably are more deserving of the title, and I'll get into that later. But it's generally considered to be the first American independent film. Certainly Cassavetes was the first guy to have like a long, extensive period making films independently, specifically outside of the Hollywood system in the United States.
Okay.
And so this was originally screened in a different version than the one we watched, or that you probably have watched, unless you caught one of 3 screenings that have happened 40 years apart. So the original version was 60 minutes. It actually was an improv. So okay, I guess I'll get into the screening history a little bit later, but basic outline. John Cassavetes does not know how to use audio equipment or a camera. Goes on to a late night radio show. Says, I hate all this bullshit I'm seeing at the movies lately. If everybody listening right now sends me $1, I will make a better movie. And I think he was drunk. He was a career alcoholic. They like his last couple films, you can kind of he died of cirrhosis of the liver, and you can see his stomach kind of hanging out in his last couple of movies in the 80s.
Huh.
I mean, there's a couple actually. That's the most interesting part of like the version of Tempest with him, Molly Ringwald, and Gina Rollins is that he's playing an alcoholic as he's dying of alcoholism.
Okay.
But that's a whole other movie. Anyway, so he goes on this radio program. He's running an acting workshop. He's just gotten a couple roles in a few films and established himself as an actor. And he goes to the people in his workshop and he's like, all right, you're the people in my movie. And that's why pretty much no one in this movie, you never see them in any other movies ever again, give or take, because they were not professional actors.
Right, right.
So the story,
Which you can tell.
yeah, you can tell, and he takes advantage of that, and that's like a huge part of his style, and I think one of the things that makes his film so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so the plot is pretty simple. You got 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. They're all black. The sister is light enough where it's ambiguous for the first part, and that also goes into he establishes like one of the major hallmarks of his styles pretty much immediately, which is that he doesn't like to establish set relationships between characters if he doesn't have to.
Okay.
If that makes any sense. So, like in his last film, Love Streams, we're following around this like woman doing a bunch of random stuff and this man doing a bunch of random stuff. We don't find out for a full 50 minutes into the movie that they're brother and sister.
Okay.
Kind of like in this film, we're not really quite sure exactly what the relationship of everybody is to everybody else. It's not quite as ambiguous as it is in some of his later films. But anyway, so 2 brothers and a sister. The 2 brothers are both black jazz musicians. It's the late 1950s. You get this very interesting look at beatnik culture from somebody who is very much on the outside of it. And the sister is the youngest. Her name's Lelia. All the characters are named after the first names of the actors because of it being rooted in improvisation exercises. So like the actress's actual name is Lelia. the actors' actual names are Huey and Ben,
Right.
or Hugh and Benny, excuse me.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, so she's like discovering boys, I guess. Hugh is having career problems with his jazz singing, and Benny just sort of he plays the trumpet, but mostly he just goes around getting into trouble. And we sort of just follow them living their lives over the course of a couple of days, and managed to hit on almost every major hot button political issue going on right now within a film that I would say is one of the least political or at least politically motivated films I've ever seen, which is a really weird thing
Well,
that happens with his work.
well, okay, okay. I mean, it deals with race relations.
Right, it deals with the things, but he has Cassavetes is really weird in that he's completely non-intellectual.
What is that?
Almost, so like he's approaching all of these political problems from the perspective that the primary frame of analysis is behavior, not politics.
Okay.
And I think that's why this movie stood up a lot better than most of the other films about race relations from like that 10-year period.
Mm-hmm.
Except for maybe like The Well. The Well's a great movie. We should watch that at some point. But yeah, everything is sort of in terms of what would the character feel and respond to in the situation. Things do happen. The most famous scene in the film comes almost exactly in the middle of it, and it's of course the scene where Lelia has sex for the first time, and the man that she's with, who's white, he realizes, she realizes, like, oh, I don't actually want this romance or sex. She says something to the effect of, like, I didn't realize it could be so awful.
Right.
And then he meets her family and realizes that he didn't realize she was black.
Right.
And it's never discussed outright. I guess it's like it's sort of the guy comes back and apologizes later. It's a subtext in a lot of the conversations afterwards, but there's no point in the movie where it's trying to use that as like, oh, this is an illustration teaching moment. It's just sort of like an emotionally affecting moment without a clear stance, right? Because we can't completely villainize the guy. He doesn't really he seems like he's shallow. There's a lot of indications that, he comes from a decent amount of money, like he offers to take everybody out to dinner, he pays for the cab, etc., etc. But we're not really allowed to confront him as this abstract symbol of race relations. We have to confront him through essentially what is his character, what does he want, what are his motivations. And so I think that makes everything a lot more complicated. And there's just like, there's not a point in the movie where he's telling you, like, this is what you should do, this is what you should think. Whereas, like, you take another movie about race relations from that period, let's say, I mean, not exactly the same period, but there's just not a lot of movies about that subject. So I'm going to jump ahead roughly 10 years. Let's say, like, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
Okay. All right. All right.
The entire point of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is Katharine Hepburn is evil. Sidney Poitier is, what like every sheltered white person secretly wishes black people are. And everybody has an awkward dinner. And eventually we learn that racism is wrong. If you go in knowing everything, like there's a value to having your beliefs reaffirmed. That's why like people go to church and everything. But there's also this kind of, in being so didactic in the style of the film, the intelligence of the audience and the characters isn't respected. B, it signifies kind of a hesitance to engage directly with the characters. Like, the characters have to be railroaded into making the point of the film, and the success of the film is kind of measured on how much or how little it gets across this broad point.
So when Tony, Lilia's, I guess, boyfriend, realizes that she's black, he makes an excuse to leave, and he leaves. So we're not supposed to make any kind of judgment that there's that he's right or wrong in doing so, or that he's any better or worse a person for having done so?
No, I mean, I think you're supposed to be offended at it, but you're also the film's not going to reward you for being offended, if that makes any sense. Like the thing that Cassavetes is interested in is what do these people do and where do they go next?
So it's okay if you're not offended.
It's well, I guess it's like the offense is not the deeper context of what's going on in the scene.
Okay.
Because I guess like a lot of the film is about, or a lot of the structure of the film, I don't know that it's necessarily a film that's like, it touches on a lot of things. I don't know if I could say it's like about something or like come away with the thesis statement, but I mean, a lot of it is based around people changing their personas, people behaving according to things that are not shown on screen, people reacting to things that are never shown, and emotions and behavior just sort of dumping themselves into scenes because they're kind of driving. The camera is not driving. So like the perfect example of that would be when Benny is hanging out with his two friends. They're all talking about the statues.
Mm-hmm.
And the one guy, like Benny likes the statue. The other guy just suddenly gets offended that Benny likes the statue. They're arguing like very vehemently, suddenly, seemingly over nothing. We never find out pretty much anything about the other guy's like backstory or why he might have gotten upset over that.
Well,
Suddenly
no,
he
that's
gets
not.
upset.
Well, no, we do know why, right? Benny is the one. Isn't Benny the one who's looking at her as like is he the one that talks about her quote unquote can? He's basically checking out the statue's ass.
No, no. So his two friends. So he's looking at it and he's like, "Oh, I want to put that on a Christmas card because
Oh,
he's."
that statue, that
It's
statue.
like and it does have like a traditional structural aspect in the film in that it's the first foreshadowing that he's gonna quit chasing girls and doing whatever at the end of the movie.
Okay.
But at the same time, his friend, the guy with the giant nose, the guy that's like carrying everybody out of the alley at the end,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Benny makes a comment about like, "Oh, I like the statue. I want to put and he's just like, it's stupid." And
He,
they're like,
he
"All right."
says I want to put it on a Christmas card.
Right. And then we see a larger version of that phenomena when we see Lelia go on the second date after she's had sex, and she's kind of like throwing this like low-key temper tantrum. She takes like 2.5 hours to get ready for a date. Eventually her brother has to like shame her into like leaving the house. Basically she just wants to leave
Just to
this
make
guy in the
clear,
house for two
not
and a
just
half hours.
just to make clear, it's not just a second date. It's a date with somebody else.
Right, it's a day with somebody else, and we see like we know why she's upset, why she's behaving the way she is,
Right.
to the point where you almost forget. But I think Cassavetes does like a really good job of keeping this in mind when writing scenes. No one else in that scene knows what was going on
Mm-hmm.
directly. Like, as far as Hugh knows, the reason she's upset is because the guy was racist. As far as her date knows, she's just acting like a lunatic. And so, again, we're forced to confront behavior as its own substantive phenomena outside of context, outside of circumstance, just as sort of this like energy that bounces around against other behavior. And I guess like that, now would be a good time, I guess, to go into the history of the movie a little bit. So
Okay.
this was the first screening and the only screening for about 2 years was in 1958. It was screened as a double feature with a 30-minute short film directed by a guy named Alfred Leslie with input by Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, called Pull My Daisy. And then Shadows, the 1 hour cut, which is now referred to as UR or Unreleased Shadows, was given its second to only public screening. The screening was a huge success, but then Cassavetes went back and re-edited the movie and reshot large portions of it. So
Why?
it just hadn't turned out the way that he wanted it to. So the maybe the most famous shot in the film is the very last screen where it says this film has been an improvisation.
Yeah.
That is a lie. So for the like year and a half he was shooting this, because I think shooting for it started in 56.
Hmm.
um Initially he did actually just he filmed everything. He just got come into a little bit of money, and he was also like a compulsive gambler, so he never really had much issue with spending a lot of money on a project. And so he bought a bunch of black and white film stock, filmed literally everything, and gave like the most basic character outlines to everybody, and just had them work out scenes until something looked like a movie.
Okay.
um, and I mean that was apparently enough. I've never seen this cut. It does exist. It was lost in somebody's attic for 35 years because somebody left it on a subway train in like 1960. But it was eventually found by a guy whose name is going to sound kind of familiar to people who've been listening to this podcast for a
Yeah.
while, and who lives not very far from either of us, Mr. Raymond Carney, professor at Boston University, and a guy who has pissed off a lot of people who have been or probably will be guests on this show. So,
He's the guy
also,
that won't return the movies, right?
he's the guy who won't return the movies to Mark Rappaport.
Yeah.
And now Mark has better transfers of everything, and that ended with there was a happy ending there. He's like hot shit on Fandor now. I mean, good for
Wait,
him.
Mark Rappaport or Ray Carney is hot shit?
Mark Rappaport. Ray Carney, for all I know, he's just like holed up
All right.
with Mark Rappaport's digital masters, just staring at them, thinking about illness right now.
Ray Carney would not return Mark Rappaport's movies.
Okay, so this is a so Ray Carney is primarily known internationally for being. I mean, if we're being completely honest here, the guy's probably seen more independent U.S. made films than any living person.
Okay.
He also was the first guy to ever write a book about John Cassavetes in English. He wrote 6 or 7 books about John Cassavetes. One of them is, even after all the like shit that I went through with this guy, it's still one of the best film books I ever read. It's called Modern. What is it? Pragmatism, modernism in the movies, and he just goes through and breaks down the movies, and he has this like incredibly fresh, clear perspective. The light shining through the crack. You don't realize quite how cracked the window the light shining through is at that point, but no, it's a great book. And then he compiled every interview that Cassavetes gave in his lifetime, basically in a sort of autobiography. It's like a 500-page interview book called Cassavetes on Cassavetes, which is absolutely excellent. Well worth checking out of the library and taking a look at. And that's the primary source for most of the biographical details and things that I'm probably going to be sharing today. So, with that out of the way, yes, Ray Carney is probably the only person crazy enough to go chasing after a film print that probably didn't exist for 35 years. I am still not sure how he found it in a random stranger's attic.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow it happened. Anyway, he ends up with the film print. He has it. I mean, whenever this guy dies, he's got I mean, I'm imagining it's probably like a shed or something, because I can't see how he would actually fit all the stuff in his house. But he befriended Cassavetes when Cassavetes was dying, so he knew Cassavetes in the 1980s and got to know him fairly well, and kind of gave him the Boswell pitch. He's basically like, okay, you want to be remembered for this stuff, make sure I have copies before you're dead.
Okay.
So there's a lot of like plays, different drafts of scripts. Supposedly there's an entire feature film that was shot on video or something that he has that literally nobody's ever seen.
Okay.
Just anything and everything related to this man's life is sitting somewhere, either in Jenna Rollins' house or in Ray Carney's shack in his backyard or whatever.
Okay.
And
wait,
yeah,
what does Rollins have to do with this?
she was Cassavetes' wife.
Okay,
So
okay,
she owns the estate.
okay,
So she's the person who owns like or co-owns the copyrights on all this stuff.
okay.
Um, she also did not get along with Ray Carney. Neither did the business person for the films and the estate, Al Ruban, who's still around. And yeah, so there was this huge fight between Ray Carney and the Criterion Company because they hired him. They put out the thing I was watching the DVD off of. They put out this excellent 8 disc box set with the 5 movies that had the least rights complications. Those being Shadows, Faces, A Woman Under the Influence, Open Night, and Killing of a Chinese Bookie. And they hire Carney as a consultant on this box set, and then suddenly the box set comes out, and there's nothing. Like, he shows up for like 30 seconds as an interview subject in this 3 hour like bonus documentary on the last disc.
Okay.
And Carney, who has this like so he had kind of like an ongoing letter column on his BU website that I wrote into a couple times, and that like a lot of the people we've had on the show so far would write into it periodically. Like, I don't know how they currently stand, but Ray Carney and like Kaveh Zahegi were very close. Or like John Jost, when he would come through Boston, he would always end up giving a screening at BU because Ray Carney arranged it.
Okay.
Yeah, so all this stuff's in his shed, and then this box set comes out, and he declares war on the Criterion Company on this letter column on his website, which has got like not a lot of traffic by internet standards, but by independent film standards, it's like this hot hopping thing at that point. And he says that the
Wait,
Criterion.
just one thing. Around when is this?
So let me look when the box set was released. Carney's mailbag page was going when I was in high school and then stopped pretty like towards the end when I was in college. So I'm gonna guess that was running from like 2003 to like 2011.
Okay, and this is the time frame that it's happening.
Yeah, that's the time frame. I mean, let me look at the box set and get the exact date that this actually came out. But 2004, yeah. So this was probably towards the beginning of the mailbag. Somehow or other, he got into a fight with Criterion, and he said that they wouldn't let him put the alternate cut of Shadows onto the box set as a bonus feature, and he blamed Al Ruban, the business manager, and he blamed Jenna Rollins publicly, saying that they were holding on to the thing because they wanted to make more money off the movie in the future by withholding it.
Okay.
Al Ruban and Jenna Rollins never made public statements. One of them did make a private statement to Mark Rappaport, which I am party to. I'm not going to go into the details because they're not mine to disclose, but let's just say that seemingly everybody who's not Ray Carney who was involved in this debacle seems to blame it on Ray Carney doing something or acting like a lunatic at some point in the process, which at the time he hadn't stolen Mark Rappaport's film masters yet. So there wasn't like when I eventually, so God, that's a whole other, I mean, I kind of went into this in the episode with Matt last week, but
let's
yeah, we can skip all that. But when I went into the BU film archive / library, I talked to the lady at the desk and I was like, hey, do you know where I can find Ray Carney, or do you know anything that's going on with like where these film masters might be?
Mm-hmm.
She pulled me aside, and it was Halloween. I remember it was Halloween because I made a joke that she made a joke that like, oh, okay, I knew that eventually my treat was going to show up. And she starts telling me like the guy's just been hoarding. Like he would take stuff out of the B. Like he basically, the BU library had this huge problem with him taking out VHS tapes and just like adding them to his collection and never returning them to BU.
Seriously?
Wow. Yeah, like this was an ongoing, like this kind of hoarding or like inability to let go of objects thing was an ongoing thing. Of course, I was not going to BU at the time, so I only knew him through the mailbag at that point.
Right.
And then, of course, in retrospect, him saying to Criterion, like, oh, you're not good enough to have this, extra special print of shadows because I'm the only person who can take care of it properly. Given his treatment of Mark Rappaport, makes a lot of sense in retrospect. And even though I didn't say what Albert Band said to Mark on the phone, you probably get the gist. And I'm gonna have to probably say my gut says that Cardi probably screwed the pooch on the box set.
Uh-huh.
Um, and yeah, and he just like kind of declared war on the entire Cassavetes estate. And then eventually, like the whole thing with him stealing Mark's films came out. There was a petition saying, like, give him back the movies. It was signed by a lot of people who, within the independent film community, basically, like, these are like if you're running a film program at a major university, like, say, Boston University, a lot of these people are like the bread and butter of the people you can get in to come and talk about a movie to students.
Uh-huh.
And they're all basically saying, like, we don't want to have anything to do with your institution until you somehow force this guy to give Mark back his movies. After that, there was a book about Cassavetes that Kearney had finished. There were galleys, there was a cover, and it was shelved, never released. That was supposed to be about his personal relationship with Cassavetes in Cassavetes' last decade.
Uh-huh.
And that will, I wouldn't be surprised if that book never sees the light of day. I mean, I guess it's another thing to add to the pile of, because I mean, when Carney would talk about the stuff that he had laying around his house or his office at BU, he was claiming they literally like books worth of unpublished plays, prose, you name it, that Cassavetes just did, and it never ended up anywhere. And there's been no movement on any front really. To I think everybody's just kind of waiting for Ray Carney to die before they try to get this stuff. I mean, Ray, if you're listening to this, and you want to come on and talk about any of this,
Tell your side of the story.
if you want to come on and talk, like, I'm not willing to edit anything, but if you want to defend yourself, I'm more than happy to Zoom with you.
Yeah, we don't edit much on here. So
Yeah, like we also don't publish a prose transcript, which was like an annoying thing that he used to do where he would kind of publish these edited. He had like I think he thought he was Noam Chomsky on some level because like Chomsky can get away with it. He can publish a bunch of like small cheap books where it's literally just him talking off the top of his head for 120 pages with somebody else kind of asking questions along the way.
okay.
And Carney would publish a lot of interviews in that style on the Mailbag website. Or I mean, he had. I'll have to see if it's right. He had a really weird website. It was like a giant maze, but the meat of it was the mailbag because there were a bunch of like book excerpts and stuff that were arranged in a really confusing order. He also looks exactly like Orville Redenbacher. I should point that out for you and the listeners. Like literally, I was in Valparaiso, Indiana, which is where the Orville Redenbacher factory is when we were shooting the movie. There's a shot of it in the movie. It's the beginning of episode 3, I think, somewhere in there.
This is
No, it's in episode 1. And yeah, and there's this like statue of Orville Redenbacher just on a park bench. And I was like, holy shit, that's Ray Carney.
uh-huh.
Like exact height, exact haircut, everything is like.
So that's one notch in Ray Carney's favor.
Yeah, he's kind of, and it's funny because like at first when I looked at him, I was like, oh, okay, this guy looks like a really square version of Andy Warhol. But then the longer of course, on the other hand, what did Orville Redenbacher look like, right? You take those spikes out of Andy Warhol's hair, make him look a little bit less like he's thinking about something, and you got popcorn. But yeah, so that's I guess the long story of the two different versions of this movie. And I mean, the first version of this movie, Carney's not wrong in saying that it's incredibly historically important because yes, there are other films that could be considered the first U.S. independent film. The major candidates are The Little Fugitive, On the Bowery. Those are pretty much the major candidates. And
Why does this get the distinction?
uh, because those other two films didn't make quite the same. So Shadows was a huge, like, relative to the budget and production level, it was a huge success. It got a lot of critical praise from unusual quarters, like Kurosawa, the Japanese director, the the guy who directed Seven Samurai and
Yep.
Rashomon and everything like that.
Rashomon, yeah.
When he first saw the film, he like was completely blown away, and he was like, "Whoa! I've never heard audio sound so much like it does in real life in a movie." And Cassavetes heard this, and he was like, I mean, he didn't say anything publicly, but he's thinking to himself, "Oh, the reason it sounds like that is because we didn't know what we were doing."
Right.
Right? Like you can tell the audio has been compressed to death on the copy. Like the copy I was watching, like now that I've done a little bit of the editing for the radio show, like I recognize, holy crap, these tapes in 1958, this must have been barely legible.
Yeah, yeah.
Like most of the dialogue. And yeah, so like Kurosawa loved it. It got into some major film festivals. Jonas Mekas, who was not yet writing for The Village. No, I think he was writing for The Village. I can't remember when The Village Voice was established, but Jonas Mekas was the film critic for The Village Voice for a very long time, and also an experimental filmmaker. And he saw these two movies, and he was like, "This is the biggest thing to ever happen in the movies."
Village Voice began in 1955, so a few years.
Okay, yeah, so he was writing for Village Voice at that point then. And he was also in with like the Ginsberg, like he knew most of the people that were in Pull Your Daisy.
Okay.
Which is kind of interesting. I don't know how the two films ended up on the same bill, because Cassavetes didn't have any actual connections to like beat culture that I'm aware of.
Uh-huh.
I guess it was just sort of like those were the two experimental films.
Was this just a one-time showing, or like no, there was
That
a
was a one-time
actual
showing.
run? It what?
That was a single showing
Okay.
at a specific theater in New York City. I can't remember which one.
Okay. How did he get it in there, or did he rent out the theater? Or
I think the two of them rented out the theater probably, or there was some kind of standing film series for foreign films or something.
this isn't.
Yeah, but like independent or experimental films, it's always really interesting when you can figure out exactly where they were screened, because there's no like dedicated spaces just for that stuff don't really exist that much before a certain point. Like the whole idea of art movies as like a separate category of movie, I don't feel like that's really a thing until the 50s.
Okay.
But yeah, so he makes this movie. And also Jonathan Rosenbaum, who was then a teenager, living in where he grew up in like the deep South. His parents owned a movie theater. Teenage Jonathan Rosenbaum sees this, and he's like, "Whoa!" And I think he still says that's like one of his top two favorite films about race relations ever made in the U.S. This, yeah. But yeah, so the right people see it. Cassavetes, the studios are like, okay, we don't know what to do with this guy, but we're gonna give him money to make some more movies because this thing's got buzz and attention. He goes on to make one okay movie, and then the worst movie of his entire career, called The Child Is Waiting. And then after that, any movie that he directed after that was entirely, if it wasn't completely self-funded and produced and whatnot, it was he was the guy going around getting the money. And the money was, he was never getting the money from large studios, generally speaking. Like I think part of the money for Husbands came from Columbia Studios, but other than that, I can't think of
How was he, the movies that he self-funded? How was he able to fund them?
Well, he was a famous actor.
Okay.
As was his wife.
Okay.
So he won an Oscar. You ever see The Dirty Dozen?
Yeah.
Yeah. He won a Best Supporting Oscar for that.
So at this point, he's not.
You've seen him as an actor probably in like dozens of movies without realizing it.
So at this point, he's a famous actor who suddenly decides, I'm going to make a movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I
don't
mean, I
think it's
think he
that type
also
of
wanted to
movie.
make a movie because so he didn't get into the Lee Strasberg school, and that's like a huge
He did or did
defining,
not?
did
He
not.
okay.
So he was in this weird, and I think we talked about this during the Alexander the Great episode a little bit, but he had this deep resentment for the Lee Strasberg method acting school.
Because he didn't get in.
I mean, that probably didn't help. I think if it was initially despite it not getting in, he at least developed his own theory that was completely at odds with the Lee Strasberg method acting school of like
Mhm.
what acting was supposed to be and how theater was supposed to deal with, the people on stage.
Yeah.
And I think that comes through. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make watching Cassavetes movies is they think it's method acting because there are these extreme emotional states,
Mhm.
but it's not method acting because it's kind of it's reactional, for lack of it. Like I guess the difference is, I mean, I'm trying like a classic method actors, Meryl Streep, Jack Nicholson,
Not Martin Scorsese. Robert De Niro.
Robert De Niro.
We'll go a little further back. The Godfather.
Oh, Marlon Brando, right?
Marlon Brando, yeah.
Yeah, right. The most famous example. And for them, and I think honestly, like across the board, give or take, with their performances, everything is about projecting this strong, dominant presence onto the screen. Everything is about kind of like owning the scene with this like incredibly like when I see Meryl Streep in a movie, I get the sense that she knows every emotional beat that she's hitting, but I don't get the sense that she's actually responding to the other person that she's talking to.
Okay.
Which for Cassavetes was like the cardinal sin of acting.
Okay.
Like anything that seemed like, and that was part of why he liked bringing in non-professional actors. Especially, he doesn't do it in this movie, but in all of his later movies, he sets up a lot of scenes where it's an experienced professional actor acting with a completely non-professional non-actor, because the non-actor would approach the material in certain ways that would force the actor to adjust their style and to be spontaneous on camera in a way that they wouldn't be if they were allowed to stay in a state where they felt prepared and in control of the scene.
Mhm.
Uh,
So, so wait, this is okay. This is an independent cinema. The he's raising money. What do you say? He got money from Columbia, or
that
what?
was that was like 10 years later for a movie called Husbands with Peter Falk and Ben Gazzara.
Okay, okay.
But yeah, I forget what's maybe it was Paramount. I mean, the two movies that he made for the studios after this one, the first one's called Too Late Blues, and it stars Bobby Darin. It's another movie about jazz musicians. Bobby Darin is not particularly good as an actor, either as an experienced actor or as a non-professional non-actor.
Uh-huh.
And he kind of sinks that movie a bit, but there's good stuff in there. And then there's A Child Is Waiting, which was recut by the studio. Jenna Rollins plays like some version of the miracle worker. She's got a class full of mentally challenged students. And eventually, like, Cassavetes supposedly actually choked the producer of the movie after he got into an argument, because he was so flamed up that the producer of the movie basically was pissed off that he wasn't making the people on screen look quote unquote retarded enough.
Uh-huh.
Basically, the studio wanted some kind of like white savior movie, but for mentally challenged people. He didn't want to do that. He had a temper. And then he basically got blackballed from Hollywood for like 4 years
Okay.
after that movie. And then he came out with a movie about middle age marriage and a lot of other stuff that probably would have been the one I would have chosen to watch tonight if it weren't 2.5 hours long. But it's called Faces. It's excellent. It's really good.
I'm trying to make sense of the movie, and I don't quite understand what I just saw. I mean, it's not that the story, or if there is a story, doesn't make sense.
There's like linear time. Like he
Yeah.
never has like time go, but he never plays tricks with time or anything. It's like pretty clear what's going on at any given point,
Okay.
I guess. Like,
I guess I wasn't sure what I was watching.
hmm. I think that's like that's what's so fascinating about the film is like on the one hand it's so much of a piece with this culture of the time. On the other hand, it doesn't really look like anything else.
Do you think this movie could be made today?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I mean, like, when I was watching this, I was kind of thinking of like Moonlight.
Why?
Well, just because like it was the last like huge movie that everybody was talking about that was about race relations, give or take.
Mhm.
And I personally really did not like that movie. I did not. It seemed very myopic, self-indulgent, and sort of. And I think like watching this film again because I probably haven't seen this in at least 10 years. I mean, when back in the day, I read God knows how much on it, so I still remember most of what was going on in the movie, even when I was watching it now. But yeah, so I guess it's like you get the sense that people's problems matter in shadows without any of the people seeming like they're the center of the universe and without any of there's no preciousness about bad things happening. It's just like a bad thing happens, the person responds, life moves forward.
Okay.
The thing doesn't go away. And like in Moonlight, I felt like so much of it was about flattening the world around the protagonist so that you can see his status as a victim.
Mhm.
And I think that tends to. I walked away from it feeling like somebody was saying something I agreed with to me because they were trying to sell me something, not like I learned something or like I was more sensitive to something. I got the sense the movie wanted me to like it in ways that I didn't think it had earned. I guess. Like, and with Cassavetes, one of the things that's so fascinating, I mean, there's a lot of really, and I mean, I'll get into the improvisation thing later too, because there's some importance about the improvisation. But where was I going with that? So
I saw a movie in which a white guy directs and films black people. That's why I'm thinking that this couldn't be made today.
yeah, I mean that I wasn't even thinking on that level. I just kind of I feel like there
The
was an
reason,
appetite for subtlety and nuance, or maybe or like a trust in the audience that something good might come out of showing them subtlety and nuance that I don't think anybody trusts anymore. Like I think most people thought the average American person was a lot smarter in 1958 than they probably do now.
wait, say that again?
So, with the rise of fascism in the United States, with like, everybody going off doing stupid shit, the president told me to drink bleach, I'm going to drink bleach. I think the idea of art going specifically for subtlety and nuance seems much more dangerous and less appealing than it did in, say, 1958.
Okay.
And as a result, I feel like most of the films dealing with these issues that I've seen that were made in the last few years, they're very afraid that you could come away with multiple interpretations, I
Mhm.
guess.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
in a way that this film sees that as a mark of like sophistication's the wrong word, but it doesn't want you to walk away thinking like, oh, okay, this is about like specifically how racism is bad, or like this is specifically about this thing or idea.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thread that hasn't necessarily been picked up on. I mean, I think also part of that is like the movie theaters are all in financial decline. They need big flashy things that you can sell. In some sense, like the weird accidents of the US independent cinema that have occurred over the happy accidents over the last like 50 to 70 years were a result of movies having such a cultural dominance that you could get this overflow money and like people were willing to kind of come out for something because it was a movie or just because like I think a lot more money was being spent on movies
Mhm.
versus say television or other substitute goods. And I think now, like if you were going to make a movie where the point is, I mean, I don't know, like a Charles Burnett movie like Killer of Sheep or something. Not that Killer of Sheep did particularly well when it sort of, but didn't come out. But if you made a movie where it's like, okay, there's black people in it, it's not really specifically about being black. It's like this guy talking about his personal experience essentially and kind of filming his neighborhood. I mean, I guess it's like like so the Charles Burnett movie, it's a movie, it's about black people, it's written by a black guy, directed by a black guy, shot by a black guy. But it's not really, not everything is specifically tailored around addressing the fact of blackness
Okay.
in a way that I think is more humanizing to the characters and ultimately actually makes them more empathetic to a broader audience. Because like ultimately the other kind of approach to cinema, you're left with kind of good intentions and othering. You can't fully bring the people, you can't integrate the people into the world
Hmm.
if you're too hung up on kind of holding up the pillars of the melodramatic archetypal narrative structure, I guess. But yeah, so as far as the improvisation thing, the improvisation, the first year or so of shooting was improvisation. They eventually did come to some kind of loose plot. Cassavetes looked at the movie. He was like, I don't like how this looks. The improvisations don't look as natural as I want them to. Most of them look kind of studied in like acting class exercises, which is, the opposite of, he wants the people to forget their acting essentially.
Hmm.
And so he goes back, rewrites portions of it, and creates essentially the method that Mike Lee would use to make almost all of his movies. You know Mike Lee,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, like Secrets and Lies and Topsy Turvy and all his movies. And so when Mike Lee does it, he calls it retro scripting, which, if he'd figured it out before John Cassavetes made this movie, I'm sure John Cassavetes would have appreciated hearing about that. But the way that Mike Lee makes his movies is he has the actors come in, he comes up with a series of vague scenarios around their characters. They improvise around them for probably like 2 3 months. He takes what he likes from the improvisations and then writes a complete script, and then the script's set in stone. Like nobody changes a word from the script. Nobody's like using it as a base. You're just shooting it as a script.
Oh, so the original improvised or the original mostly improvised stuff is not what you actually see in the final movie?
Correct.
Oh, I didn't
Probably
realize that.
about half the film is reshoots. The cut of the film that we watched.
Are you talking about Cassavetes or are you talking about Mike Lee?
Cassavetes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, with Mike Lee, everything you see on screen was scripted, but it was scripted around this long process of improvisation with the actors, which also allows him kind of like Cassavetes would like doing a lot of rewrites on set because he kind of saw like anything coming across as bad acting is usually more about bad writing.
Hmm.
Um,
No, there was plenty of. Well, okay. Never mind.
Well, no, no, no. I guess it's just sort of like he believed at least that there's a way. If the line sounds wrong, it's because you didn't tailor it to the performer.
Okay. Okay.
You kind of saw it as like, when you're arranging a piece of music, you're not going to give all the bass notes to, your timpani player or something. If the thing sounds wrong, it's because you're putting the wrong sound or movement in the wrong place. The other thing that's kind of interesting about, and granted, like we could talk about this thing all night, but all the movement is improvised,
Hmm.
which is a very, very, very uncommon thing, even in improvised cinema. So like what's a good example of something that's actually like largely improvised that's famous? Curb Your Enthusiasm. We've all seen it. You've seen an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm, right?
Oh, I think I've seen most of the series.
Right. So everything, Larry David writes an outline, then he brings in the comedians or whoever. They improvise along the outline. Everything's improvised except the blocking. Everywhere that everybody walks or moves on that show is carefully pre-planned. That is the only thing that is pre-planned,
Okay.
except for, obviously the outlines of the episodes. And when Cassavetes would do it, though, he would specifically tell the actors, move wherever you would normally move.
Okay.
Move whatever way you want to move. And you can kind of see that with like the cameras having trouble reacting or moving with motion sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
And that only gets worse as his movies go on. Like Faces is literally and I guess that is kind of a weird, like almost complete reversal of standard film dynamics. Like standard film dynamics is people exist for the sake of the camera. They are performing some kind of ritual of theater or whatever and presenting it at the behest of the camera. The camera is in this position of power. Like the camera can kind of call a work stoppage if it wants to, if it doesn't like something.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't reason with it. And yeah, and in this, like you just have the actors are completely in control of where the camera's going and not vice versa.
Which is why you don't get particularly stellar cinematography in this.
Yeah, he has like one of the he has so little use for like pretty shots.
Mm-hmm.
And like you almost get the sense he's avoiding them because like some of the stuff he's shooting, it's like hard not to make it look pretty. Like New York City at night in the 1950s with like a black and white camera, it's gonna look really nice. But yeah, there's like very little sense that like there's no single shot anywhere in this movie where I get the sense it's going like, hey, look at me, which is in a lot of other movies that's like 90% of why the movie exists is I got this one really pretty picture. I mean, I guess that was another thing I didn't
Wait a second. Wait a second. You're denigrating wonderful cinematography. And we're talking about a visual medium. I mean,
well, but okay, so it's a visual medium, but it's also an auditory medium.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's also a visual medium and auditory medium that you're experiencing in time.
Right.
And I think that, like, I mean, there's nothing wrong with a pretty piece of cinematography that, like, Antonioni, that's like all that those movies are basically. But I think the prettiness of a given shot has a
wait. I just want to stop right there. I don't want to use the word pretty. It was a miss. It was incorrect for me to use the word pretty. It sounds twee and it has very negative connotations. Let's change that to beautiful.
The mastery implied in a shot, I guess. Like
yeah, okay. Masterful shot.
Like a sign that like the guy has been using a camera for a very long time
and knows how to use it.
And wants to make sure that he knows how to use it.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, that may be true for some people.
And so the issue is that, and I mean like that, if you can get your cinematographer to do that within a framework where those shots integrate nicely with the rest of the film and become a cohesive whole,
right,
then that's totally fine. Like Robert Altman is a genius at doing that. There's all these like gorgeous landscape or house shots that perfectly set the mood for the next shot, don't feel like they're supposed to be in another movie. Whereas something like, I don't know, like George Washington by David Gordon Green, or again, Moonlight, there's a lot of stuff where it's like, oh, everything looks like perfectly color graded. Everything looks gorgeous. There's this handheld camera and you have this fake documentary camera style.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, okay, I want everything to look pretty, but I also want everything to, or not pretty, I want everything to look impressive and beautiful, but I also want everything to look raw and unfiltered.
Okay.
And it's like you can't do both, especially when it's really obvious that you're framing your handheld shots like very meticulously, like you were using a tripod.
Okay.
Yeah, so it freezes time within a thing that's supposed to continuously move. The kind of the pretty shot, for lack of the beautiful shot. The other thing is it takes you out of the movie, for me at least. A lot of times, like if it like
I'll see. I have the opposite. Sometimes that is the movie.
well, I mean, sometimes that is the best part of the movie. Yeah, like there's
Yeah.
a lot of movies where you got the only person who has any idea what the fuck they're doing is the cinematographer,
Yeah.
and you're just kind of seeing like some really, really high-end vacation slides with like a plot or some acting in between.
You just insulted it again. You just insult. You're talking about great cinematography, and you're calling it vacation slides.
Well, but what I'm saying is like the landscape shots they're not interacting with the rest of the movie.
Okay.
They're there basically so that people are like, oh, that was a pretty landscape shot. It's a pretty movie. And I think that
Okay. Have you ever seen Lawrence of Arabia?
not yet. No.
Okay. You've seen Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, and I think like their Apocalypse Now is a much more deliberate movie than the kind of stuff I'm necessarily talking about.
Okay, let's talk about that. Well, no, I mean you're denigrating cinematography here. That's
I'm not
I
saying
want
that.
you
I'm
to
saying that
express something that
cinematography. Okay, think of it like
you're
think of it
looking
like this. You got a ballet
you're
troupe.
criticizing actual somebody who can actually use a camera.
So think of it like this: you got a ballet troupe,
Okay.
and you're trying to put on the Nutcracker.
Yeah.
And the best dancer you have in your ballet crew,
Yeah.
all they want to do is like strut their stuff, walk around to people and say it's on, do some dance moves, and then say you got served. They might be a great dancer, they might have all the components of a great dancer, but if the dance troupe is not acting in some kind of sync, then you've just got like this obnoxious person going around saying I can serve people.
Okay.
That was a very weird metaphor, but
Yeah, I don't quite see because you're what you're telling me is are you saying that that's what ballet is or you're let me backtrack. Let's
no, I'm not saying that's no. I'm using that as a metaphor for the cinematography. So, like, if
give me an example of a movie with good cinematography.
with like good cinematography in the sense that it's purposeful.
Yes.
Okay. Mirror by Tarkovsky. Pretty much any Tarkovsky movie, any Ozu movie, any Bresson movie, any Chantal Ackerman movie.
Okay, so there the cinematography is intentional.
Yeah, and it's not like I mean, Chantal Ackerman took a lot of. I mean, my favorite Chantal Ackerman movie is literally 95% of it is just landscape shots
Uh-huh.
and like cinematography, but she understands how to use the landscape shots as language as opposed to just sort of like a mini game
As a what?
instead of like is like a mini game in a video game like
Game.
oh we did the main plot line, you got all the rings, now let's do 3D Sonic the Hedgehog for 30 seconds, now back to the main action. And that's how landscape shots I feel like work in a lot of movies where it's not considered, when it is considered as like a poetic aspect, it can be one of the best parts of the movies, right? Like
Okay.
Ozu, you got those beautiful shots of the train leaving or arriving at the station. It's this beautiful open-ended metaphor. It's
Okay,
not
I just want to call
yeah.
it. You've just been talking like a lot about people who you know how to use a camera in a movie, and that as if there's something.
There's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just that there's a point where virtuosity is not its own inherent virtue.
Mhm.
For like I don't know. You ever heard like a Joe Satriani record?
No.
Okay, he's like what everybody has in their head when they first walk into a guitar store and like try to play that riff from Smoke on the Water like once or twice.
Okay.
right? He's like incredibly technically proficient with the guitar. He's like, he's playing like 64th notes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's complete fucking garbage. It's just this, like his hands going up and down the neck, and he may as well just be jerking off.
Mm-hmm.
This man, on a technical level, probably can play guitar as well or better than 99.99999% of humanity, but he's not doing anything with it.
Yeah. Well, okay. Technical proficiency isn't the same thing as poetry.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of what I'm saying.
Okay.
Um,
But you can have poetry that is technically proficient.
You can. I think it makes it a little bit more complicated because there is always that. There's a lot less nagging gray area when you're dealing with technical virtuosity versus I guess poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can look at a sunset and immediately know it's pretty.
Mm-hmm.
The more complicated or nuanced something is, the less likely I am, or I metaphorically in this situation, I am to immediately grasp that what I did was what I wanted or correct.
The more complicated, say that again. The more complicated something is.
So, I mean, I guess like like if a picture is pretty,
Mm-hmm.
I can tell immediately, like it's not hard. You can look at it and like, okay, yeah, that's an aesthetically attractive picture.
Yeah.
If I present a scene that's like, like a theatrical scene where it's like, okay, here's my take on interracial dating,
Mm-hmm.
for example, as we saw in this movie, and that it's a lot harder to look at that and figure out like, oh, okay, like, did I do this right? Did I do this wrong? Should I have been more obvious? Should I have been less obvious? Is the thing that I'm saying to like reaffirm that I'm right in this moment in history going to be wrong later on?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like I guess I'm not saying like cinematography generally is garbage. I'm saying that like it's a team sport. Making a movie is a team sport.
Okay.
And if you have a ball hog, or you have somebody who seems to be like, you toss them the ball and they're not acting like they're playing a basketball game or whatever, you're going to have problems.
All right, this one's missing one of the members of the team. That analogy. You don't have a point guard. I don't know. Is that a basketball thing? Sounds like a basketball thing.
You think point guard's basketball?
Yeah. All right.
It's been so long since I played basketball, but yeah. So I guess that's yeah.
So you're playing basketball has five people, five people on the court at a given time, right? All right. So there's only four people here, or one of them is very very short and doesn't know how to play.
Right. It's like you can speak to me in incredibly intricate sentences, but if you're not actually telling me something, you're still wasting my time.
Yeah. But okay. All right. I'm not saying that this movie suffers because John Cassavetes doesn't know how to hold a camera.
No, I think that's one of the most appealing things about it is that
yeah.
So it's weird because like there's this infectious enthusiasm with the camera, and I think like that comes through even more in Faces or like Woman Under the Influence. But they're some of the only movies where I get the sense that the person holding the camera is just as excited or more excited to be looking at it than I am. Like he's entertained by it. He's like moving around. He's like, whoa, I gotta catch this guy's face. I gotta catch that guy. I gotta do that. And I think the lack of planning and the improvisational aspect, especially in terms of the movement, contributes a lot of that factor, because he has to be presently engaged with the scene, with the camera, because he doesn't know what he has to film even.
Okay.
And that kind of gives a freshness that, on the other hand, you take that too far, there's a lot of like Cassavetes imitation movies where it's literally just like shaky camera and people screaming at each other for 20 minutes or whatever. I guess there's sort of like there's like a hidden virtuosity going on. There's like a virtuosity of clumsiness going on.
A virtuosity of clumsiness. Can you explain that?
Well, it's like he's doing this trick that seemingly only he knows how to pull off. And like, I mean, I can show you some like god awful movies to kind of give a sense of like what went right here that's like a bit less obvious on the surface that could have gone horribly wrong.
I keep picturing. Sorry, I know we were focusing so much on
Mm.
cinematography, and knowing how to use the camera. Now I keep picturing now because you had mentioned Ozu, and I keep picturing that one scene from, I think it's Tokyo Story, or he does this a lot where he just puts the camera in one place. I don't know. He wasn't the cinematographer, was he? Ozu, doesn't matter. He worked.
No, but I mean,
But he would
he
say,
clearly he's the guy making the final decisions, or
yeah,
else the
yeah.
movie's going to look so similar.
Right, and it's not only one scene in Tokyo Story where the camera just stands still. That's a
Mm,
a signature Ozu shot, right? But
mm,
there's the the camera is just standing, is not moving the whole time, and it just looking at the, I think it's the entrance way to the, I don't remember if it's the kitchen or to the room,
mm,
and people are going in and out of the, they're going in and out of the frame. The frame is actually, you don't see them behind the walls when they're going from one side to the other. So all you see is, if they've walked into the shot and then they leave. But you're seeing the wall, so you're seeing all the walls, and you're just seeing them walking into and out of the frame in that entranceway. I don't know why I keep picturing that, but that's not, oh, I don't know how to use a camera, so why don't I just put it here and leave it still? It's like no, for this particular scene, I'm making a very deliberate decision to put the camera here and to keep it still, to not move it. But also, it has to be, you can't just, the cinematographer, it can't just say, okay, let me put the camera here and let it still. It's got to be in the perfect position,
mm.
right? A little too far to the left, a little too far to the right, pointing pointing down too much, pointing up too much. Is it putting it at the right level?
Mm.
Well, I imagine maybe it was. Put the camera here. Let's see what happens.
Well, I think he's almost coming at it from like a similar, because like he uses incredibly, like Ozu we're talking about now. Ozu,
Yeah,
he uses like this incredibly similar visual vocabulary in pretty much all of his movies except like the early silent comedies. Some of them are a bit
I
different,
still
but
got to see. I'm still shocked that he started
oh
off.
yeah, maybe that's next week. We should do I Was Born, but
All right,
that's like a great. That's the only Ozu with like poop jokes and stuff.
let's watch something else then.
It's but yeah, with Ozu, I get the sense that like it's still coming out of this interest in the actors and what the actors are doing.
Okay.
And I think he will go to a sort of visual shorthand a lot in order to make the images almost like deliberately less engaging, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It's sort of like in Bresson, if he wants people to focus on the action or like, somebody's hands doing something or something like that, he takes everything off the walls in the room and then the camera's just following their hands because that's what he wants to look at and that's what he thinks is important in the shot at that point.
I don't remember that in The Fifth Element, though.
Okay, The Fifth Element's a perfect example of a movie where it's like the guy seems to be filming everything because it looks super cool without any particular understanding of humans, how they work, civilization, what it was like to not be raised by wolves
Which one's
in the
Bresson and which
future.
one's Bresson?
Besson is the Fifth Element
Okay, all
in
right.
a professional. Bresson is the guy who directed that depressing movie about that like French kid with the long hair that
Yeah,
has romantic problems and kills himself. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, I don't remember which one has an arm, which one doesn't have an arm.
um
Okay, all right. So I think we've beat to death the well, no, we haven't beat to death. Maybe there's plenty more, but about
Something exciting or titillating being in the frame isn't an inherent good is
say that
basically
again?
what I'm saying. Yeah.
Oh yeah, 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 yes, yeah. Okay, yeah. So I'm sorry. I know I've pressed so much on the cinematography.
No. All good. And I mean, there were also some other things I noticed about the movie relating to his later movies, but I don't want to go into it too much because there may be spoilers. They're also kind of esoteric if you haven't watched these movies fairly recently or studied them.
Uh-huh.
But at the very least, the central dynamic of the three siblings reminds me a lot of the central dynamic of the three adult man friends and husbands. I like how the thing to call them was right in the title, but I insisted on adult man friends.
That's the name of the title?
Yeah,
Wait,
yeah,
no.
it's John Cassavetes' Adult Man Friends, the movie. No, no, the movie's called Husbands.
Oh, okay, okay,
Husbands is
okay.
the actual.
Wait, are we talking about a
It's
different?
not called. No, it's not called Adult Man Friends.
That's another movie.
No, that's the movie
A different theater.
where
In fact, those movies aren't made for theater anymore.
that's the movie where John Cassavetes, Ben Gazzara, and Peter Falk go down to the swamp and beat the shit out of Bizarro
Okay.
while Dick Cavett looks on in horror. Wait, did I ever send you the? Okay, so John Cassavetes had also one of the two or three worst talk show appearances in the history of late night talk shows.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why? What happened?
It was totally his fault. But yeah, so Husbands, it stars him, Ben Gazzara, Peter Falk. They all show up to the Dick Cavett show completely loaded. This is all on YouTube. You can go look it up, watch it. I'm not making any of this up. They were the only guests booked for the night, right? Because Cavett would have like guests run long sometimes. It wasn't like Leno or something where they're on for 10 minutes. Totally loaded, and the first thing that Ben Gazzara starts doing is just pogo jumping in front of his chair to see if he can get the boom mic to show up in the shot. All of them refuse to talk about the movie at all. When Cavett tries to ask them an actual question, they basically like they start going like Marx Brothers on him.
Uh-huh.
And it's a really fascinating train wreck to watch. And like Cassavetes he had a large self-sabotage streak. So I think he didn't like the idea of talk shows. He didn't like the artificiality of how people have to talk on talk shows. And that's probably the most extreme example. But when I had my membership to the Museum of TV and Radio in New York, which is not called the Museum of TV and Radio anymore, but it's the same basic thing.
Yeah.
And I was going through, there's Ray Carney assembled a large collection of pretty much everything of consequence that John Cassavetes ever did on television. And these VHS tapes, they're in the archive at the Paley Center. You can pull them up just like I did if you want to go watch them, if you happen to be near the Paley Center in New York or Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And he's, you remember Tom Snyder?
Yeah, yeah.
Tomorrow with Tom Snyder, right? And I say that like I don't think I was alive when Tom Snyder was actually on television. Now that I'm saying, like,
might not have been alive.
Pepperidge Farm, remember, right? Like when I said I was saying New York, a friend used to tell me I was the only millennial who had Nam flashbacks.
Who had what?
Nam flashbacks. But like, anyway, so Tom Snyder, I'm preternaturally old. Cassavetes, he goes on Tom Snyder. I think it's 1978. It was the only talk show booking he was able to get for his film opening night, which was an enormous commercial flop.
Okay.
And he goes on, and Tom Snyder's like, "Oh, so John, you want to?" And like, you remember, like Tom Snyder, he's a sweet guy. He's not the quickest on his feet, but he's sort of like he's like what I think everybody thought Charlie Rose was. Like, he's just like a nice, affable guy. He's smart enough to finish college, but not so smart that like it gets annoying. And generally, if he has a guest on, he can ask some questions and get out of the way and just let them fucking talk.
Yeah.
And anyway, so he says, like, John, do you have a clip from this movie you'd like to show us? And John's and Cassavetes is like, no, I have a piece of the score. And you can tell that Snyder was basically counting on this like 1 minute clip from this movie as his time to get his note cards and everything prepared for the end of the show.
Yeah.
But instead they can't cut away. So you're just watching, like, in Cassavetes, he gets this fucking like devil. He had like the most evil looking grin of like, God, I mean, he's a great movie villain. He's like really good as a movie villain, like The Fury by Brian De Palma and a couple other movies. I mean, hell, The Dirty Dozen, he's got those really intense eyebrows, right?
Okay.
and he just gets this like like evil doll look, and Tom Snyder's just like nervously staring at his leg, just trying to get his notes, and the camera keeps pulling over with the lights dimmed, and he's, I don't need cute, I don't, and he's just like stuck with this light on him and nothing, or this camera on him and nothing to do for 40 seconds, and Cassavetes just looks like a fucking pig in shit the whole time on the clip. Like it was like this prank.
Yeah, but it was yeah, it was a pretty jerky prank.
Kind of a jerk. I mean, it wasn't as bad as the Dick Cavett thing, because like that's 45 seconds versus like Cavett was on for a full 45 minutes with commercial breaks,
Yeah.
or without commercial breaks. I think it was an hour with.
This is different from talked about Paul Rudd showing the clip from Mac and Me every time that he goes on Conan.
Yeah, this is closer to like Crispin Glover showing up with those giant platform shoes and almost kicking David Letterman's head off. This is like more in that, or like Gore Vidal and Norman Mailer almost getting into a fist fight also on Dick Cavett.
Oh, cool.
I don't know if you ever saw that one, but like Mailer, he's literally, because Mailer was a boxer, right? Like that was one of his big hobbies, and he's like making the boxing gestures during the interview, like he's just like holding it in, like he just wants to punch Gore Vidal really badly.
Okay.
Like there's this vibe the whole time, and I mean, Grant, like whenever Norman Mailer starts arguing with somebody, like I don't know, the whole time I'm kind of looking at it, and I'm like, just fucking kiss already, right? But that's me.
So what else do you have to say about this movie? So now, not about Cassavetes as a whole, but the
I mean, this movie specifically, I think it held up really well. I think there was a lot of stuff I picked up on that kind of grew with me that I did not pick up on when I watched it when I was younger, which is always a sign of, for me, that's usually the sign of like a good piece of work, is that I come back to it at different times at some kind of interval, and I'm still getting something interesting, or maybe even a different something interesting.
Okay. I like the scene at the museum when Benny looks at the statue and says he wants to put it on his Christmas card, and it's not clear what he likes about it.
Right, it's just like a thing stirring in him, and like there's all those great shots, like the one shot of him in the street towards the end, where you're just sort of, you get the sense he's thinking something, but you're not being told anything about what he's really thinking beyond just, the thing that he tells the guys, like, I don't want to go out chasing skirts anymore.
Yeah. Well, you get that most of the time when you see him throughout the movie, because he spends a lot of time sitting there brooding. What was that?
He seems so unhappy.
He seems so unhappy. But there's very few times where you find out what he's unhappy about. Yeah.
Right, I think like Cassavetes would probably suggest the idea that like being unhappy is not necessarily about something.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like
he's an unhappy person.
Like moods, emotions, and whatnot will happen without clear cause and effect sometimes.
Okay.
I guess. Cool. So yeah, I guess that's the beginning of season 2 right there.
So we finally watched a Cassavetes movie. Cassavetes, the filmmaker, not Cassavetes, the actor.
Right, and next week we can watch. So, did you know that Woody Allen made a sequel to this movie?
No, are you serious?
Yeah, it's called Shadows and Fog.
Oh, okay. I didn't.
No.
Okay.
No. Yet another buried movie with a great John Malkovich performance.
Yeah. Shadows and Fog?
Yeah, Shadows and Fog. It's not a very good movie, but John Malkovich is absolutely excellent in it. Same thing as I Love You, Daddy.
All right.
He just like knows when to put in the effort for movies that nobody's going to watch. I guess. I don't know. Poor John.
One day when we have the episode and we watch every single, in which we talk about every single Woody Allen movie.
I could do up to like, I think I've seen all of them up to maybe 10 years ago at least.
Yeah, I think we
right, we talked about that.
Yeah. Because I think there's an overlap between the ones you've seen and the ones I've seen, and then there's periods, and there's a lot that each of us have seen that the other hasn't. But no, I don't intend for us to see any more Woody Allen movies. It was the ones that we had talk for 5 minutes or less about each one, and the ones that we haven't. Wait, did you talk about this last time?
Yeah. I just wanted to make a joke about, because Shadows and Fog, I don't know. I mean, it's like, Okay, Woody Allen is a perfect example of a guy who does not know how to put fucking landscape shots into his movies.
Yeah.
Manhattan with Diane Keaton, right? They're like walking through the apartment and it's this like dark lit, noirish, super moody, like gorgeous. You could hang every frame in a museum.
Yeah.
And it does not match the tone in the slightest.
Mm-hmm.
It's just this like tiny man walking around his apartment complaining and eating Chinese food, but it looks like the Seventh Seal. There's my point in a nutshell.
Wow, this between this and the last episode, we spent way too much time on Woody Allen. Way too much time on Woody Allen. That is to say, talking about him at all. No, that's man can't get a fair shake, can he?
Who's doing the shaking?
What everyone's missed is Dan's horrified face. That I would even suggest that. Oh God. Oh.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like if the culture as a
the
whole wants to rebuke Woody Allen, the cinematography is probably a more personal place to hit.
Yeah. He might be more
He paid a lot of money to get that guy away from Ingmar Bergman every summer.
By the way, did I mention that I once ran into John Cassavetes?
No.
Yeah, because he was the best part of the Princess Diaries.
I remember the only time I met Jonathan Rosenbaum, he was like, yes, I never met John Cassavetes, but I was like in a room with him 3 times. And I was like, how does that work?
Well, yeah, I don't know how many times I was in a room with Hedda Matarazzo, but there was only one time that I actually said hi to her and told her that she was the best part of the Princess Diaries.
Hey, Heather Matarazzo, if you want to come on the show and talk more about the Princess Diaries 3, hell. Oh, wait, I just had a great idea for an episode. Okay, so, and I don't think pitching it here is going to necessarily ruin it. We do an episode talking about Princess Diaries 3.
Okay.
With Heather Matarazzo.
Uh-huh.
As if it was a real movie that existed.
Okay.
Nobody breaks character for an hour. Maybe we come up with like a couple basic details that we agree were in the fictional movie.
Okay.
See where it goes. I'm going to pitch this to Heather Matarazzo on Twitter. Or wait, no, she left Twitter. No.
She left Twitter. I wonder what she is.
She had to leave Twitter right before my
book
of. Oh man, too bad.
Wait, and you know what we then do? So that's one episode.
Because we haven't covered a fictional movie yet.
So
we've covered a lot of like fiction movie, but we haven't covered a movie that literally doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. Okay. All right. Well, I think what we need to do is cover that, and then I don't know. I was gonna come up with some joke about retro scripting, and I can't. I'm already taking the joke and ruining it. So.
Oh wait, no. So we record the episode and then actually make the movie out of the details that were trying to make the movie based on the podcast that like recreated from the podcast episode details.
Oh, that's even better than what I was going to suggest. So we ourselves make the movie based on that. All right.
Most of the great ancient Greek philosophers, that's about the provenance of how we know they actually said anything they said.
Because somebody else.
So you have Socrates never wrote anything down.
Right.
Plato wrote a lot of stuff down. Aristotle wrote a lot of stuff down. And then you got like these 30 or 40 other major Greek philosophers who, Diogenes, who's the one who did all the math stuff that Marx and Derrida were both obsessed? Anaxagoras or something.
Okay.
Anyway, there's a ton of these guys, and literally the only way that we know they said anything they said, or like any biographical information we have, it's like lines that people cited in like the equivalent of college papers, give or take.
Uh-huh. I was just saying, and then so we're piecing all those together in order to come up with. Oh yeah.
So like Diogenes the Great Cynic, the biographical information we have about him, most of it comes from a book that was published about 1100 years after he was dead, and the things that we presume he actually said were being quoted in a different context in some other document. So it's sort of like trying to piece together somebody's life from like a newspaper article about, their brother or something. Like we're so far removed from all of those people. The same way that we're removed from the Princess Diaries 3.
Yeah.
till we make it happen.
Yeah, yeah. The movie doesn't exist, so we have to create the review of it.
Maybe that'll be what we'll work towards. We'll try to get like Heather Matarazzo's attention, and then like the last episode of this season can be the Princess Diaries 3 episode. That could be like our arc, like narrative arc.
Or maybe every no, I was gonna say every episode we discuss it a little bit until we have. Okay, all right. So
that's all I got.
We're talking about it.
Yeah. So that's all I got for tonight. You got any final thoughts on the movie, Ryan?
No. My final thought was about. I keep picturing in my mind the museum courtyard scene where they're looking at the statues, and Benny is looking at that one statue.
Oh yeah, that was like he did a lot of like. Oh, okay, I said I was done. There's a lot of great three-person shots with staggered faces that almost remind me of Ingmar Bergman, but I know that it's not like a conscious decision he made. But like staggering them in the foreground, midground, and background, and then having them at like these extreme angles.
Yeah,
sometimes
almost like he actually knew what he was doing.
Almost. I mean, there's definitely like stuff he wanted. I'm not saying like literally couldn't get the camera to turn on. I think he just like he saw the camera like very much as a means to an end.
But that doesn't mean that he didn't take the camera and say, okay, this looks like a good shot. This angle will give me what I want.
Right.
He may not know anything about the angle, and may not have.
Right, and you can see like bits and pieces of other movies that he obviously watched. Like he obviously saw Rules of the Game and Grand Illusion. There's some, and again, the staggering things in the foreground, midground, background. Jean Renoir. Renoir also tends to like let the actors move a lot and just move the camera with it. But granted, a much more like virtuosic and graceful manner.
Yeah. He made pretty shots. I just rolled down Renoir.
Prettyshots.com. $29.99 a month for a membership.
Okay, no, I don't have any more thoughts. So I guess that's about it. So that wraps up episode 1 of season 2.
The Random Menace.
The rend. Okay, I guess this has been Anomaly Questionable Movies.
And stay tuned. We got some good guests coming up in the next couple weeks.
Yeah,
I think if we published all the ones we've recorded already that we had in the can, I think.
Yep, they're all published.
We got all the last of those.
Yeah, so
we're going to be having Frank Mosley on soon. We're going to be having hopefully Roxanne Rogers on soon. Who else? We have a secret maybe guest that. And we're having Andrew and Nick about the Van movie.
Oh, right.
Do Van movies.
Right, and who's seen all the Planet of the Apes movies?
Oh, my friend Alex.
Yeah.
Miller, who formerly of the Radio Without Money podcast.
All right. So he's going to be on, right?
He's going to be on for sure.
Okay. We're going to watch all the Planet of the Apes movies again for that.
All of them.
Or at least one of them.
Yeah. Well, he was saying Beyond the Planet of the Apes. That sounded like a good one.
Oh, that's the second.
Because he was saying it was like the craziest one, maybe.
Yeah. That was, there's some freaky stuff in that.
That'll be like our Sideshow Bob thing is every season we have to have a Planet of the Apes episode.
All right, so that means we need to stay on. So let's see, 5 seasons for 5 movies. Then we've got the TV show. We've got the animated series. And that's just...
And we're not counting reboot movies.
What was that?
We're not counting like Tim Burton reboot movies.
Right, then we got Tim Burton, and then we've got the 3 or 4 that have been made since then. So wow, we're going to be around for a while.
There's a lot of them.
We're going to do
that's not even that bad compared to there's some of those Japanese series like what is it? Drunken Master or Zatoichi or something like that, where there's like 45 movies.
Yeah, I've seen Drunken Master. I don't know why. Oh, we're gonna have to watch Reality Bites. As much as I regret the statement that I just made, but we're gonna have to watch Reality Bites.
Wait, we should see if we can get Stan on for Reality Bites, because he's like he's my other like Gen X friend who's like fascinated by what actually constitutes Gen X.
Well, the reason we have to watch Reality Bites is that the Ben Stiller character has a statue or a cookie jar or something like that of Dr. Zaius on his
Mm.
desk. So that's another Planet of the Apes movie.
Oh, right, right.
And we're gonna have to watch the Simpsons episode
Hmm.
with Planet of the Apes the musical. Dr.
There's
Zaius.
every single episode of the
What
cartoon.
was it? And every single episode of the cartoon. Oh yeah, one episode per season.
Yeah, so we're gonna be on for a while. So
Yeah.
so yeah, catch you next week.
Okay, take care, everyone.